Tiananmen Square, a historical battle for truth, censorship, and constitutional rights that changed the course of Chinese history and society. The events of Tiananmen Square and other democratic protests in China stand as a test to historical truths, misinformation, accountability, and constitutional violations that have changed the course of Chinese history, economics, and society. In an attempt to stabilize the government, delegitimize the government, this study of journals, newspapers, and online articles explores the suppression of democratic movements and how it has influenced the constitutional rights and changed the relationship with the truth. Tiananmen Square is undoubtedly one of the biggest tragedies and massacres in Chinese history carried out by the Chinese government and military. On April 8, 1989, Hu Yaobang, a former Communist Party leader and chief, and one of China's leading reformists, died of a heart attack. As a result of his death, many youths in China and students joined in Tiananmen Square to mourn his passing, but at the same time also expressed their own feeling of slow-paced reforms in China. In the following days, the protests would spread to greater numbers, protesting for a greater freedom, democracy, and inflation, salaries, to end to a dictatorship. And the Chinese government responded by releasing a warning to the protesters were at risk of severe punishment. In the following days, after the warning, a government state-run newspaper, The People's Daily, published an editorial titled "The Necessity for a Clear Stance Against Turmoil." The editorial claimed that protesters were the pawns of counter-revolutionary plot, even going as far as to say, "This is a planned conspiracy, this is turmoil." And in essence, it aims to negate the leadership of the Chinese party and negate the socialist system. As a result, this only emboldened the protesters and inflamed protests. Following this article, protests grew, and by May 20th, the military mobilized soldiers to Tiananmen Square and martial law was declared. As tensions grew between military officials and protesters, as well as hunger strikes carried out by the protesters, high-ranking government officials met to plan and approve an offensive on June 2nd. On the night of June 3rd to 4th, there was a crackdown on Tiananmen Square, where soldiers rushed the square and protesters tried to block them, forming barricades. The government counts those killed as 241, including soldiers, with 7,000 wounded, although many put this death toll much higher. This night was called, or commonly referred to as, the Night of Bloodshed. In the aftermath of the crackdown at Tiananmen, there are many people silenced and imprisoned. Additionally, there was a smaller protest held by one man where he blocked a line of tanks. The fate of that man still remains unknown today. Now, tracing back, we need to figure out why the events of Tiananmen Square started in the first place. Aside from political frustrations of how the one-party system gave them complete control, Deng Xiaoping created many economic reforms that created unrest and suspicion of corruption in many of the youths. Now, what were these economic reforms? Thanks to Deng Xiaoping's pragmatism over idealism thinking, he followed the mentality of, it doesn't matter if the cat is white or black as long as it catches the mice, and opened up trade to many foreign investors, including the US, and allowed privatized companies in China. Because of this, China had established a limited form of capitalism. As things were changing in China, students felt that the educational system was not preparing them properly for this new system, as well as were struggling because they were poor and inflation was high, which was making them face a multitude of challenges like increased poverty and lack of jobs. This only furthered their idea of corruption and formed an idea of the rich get richer that still lasts in China today. Some political figures like Hu Yaobang sympathized with students, and because of his death, it sparked protest. Following the events of Tiananmen, President George W. Bush of the United States denounced the actions taken in the square and suspended military sales and high-level exchanges with China, as well as economic sanctions that matched with other global partners. However, even though being condemned by a major trade partner like the United States, China still retained its position as a most favored nation trading status. Even though they retained this status, there was clear evidence that the Chinese government was delegitimized in the eyes of the public in China, but also globally from their economic trade partners. Without the actions taken in Tiananmen Square, China's economic policies and economic reforms would not be anywhere close to what they are today. Because of Tiananmen Square, China has been able to focus more on their economics and citizens' needs that has boosted their economy to where it is now. Another major aspect of the actions taken in Tiananmen Square are the constitutional violations of rights and freedoms that came from the actions taken by the government that delegitimized government and law in China. The first constitutional violation comes from Article 35 of the 1982 Constitution of the People's Republic of China. Article 35 states, citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, of association, and of procession, and of demonstration. The reason why this is such a big violation in terms of Tiananmen Square was that the protesters were acting peacefully, protesting for what they felt the government needed. But their voices were violently suppressed, which created a theme of censorship that traveled on through history in China, and also delegitimized law and Chinese government. The second of these constitutional violations comes from Article 37. No citizen may be arrested except with the approval or decision by the People's Bureaucratic or by decision of the People's Court. An arrest must be made public by a public security organ. This violation was just another step forward to censor those in China that delegitimized law, those who practiced law, those who carried out the laws, and Chinese government. Lastly, and most importantly, was the constitutional violation under Act 41, which is the right to criticize the state. By violently suppressing these rights, the government has established stability in their country, but at what cost? The cost of legitimacy in law? Government? Many believe so, and believes that their actions carried out after Tiananmen Square and during Tiananmen Square have reinforced the protesters' original message that corruption and authoritarianism threatens the integrity of the governance in China that delegitimizes the Chinese government. Continuing on the theme of censorship and silencing voices that are in opposition to the government of China is their biggest form of censorship, which is the fact that they have tried a test of time and history to twist facts in their favor. Originally, after the crackdown, the Chinese authorities and government officials have reported that no one was actually shot in the square itself. However, that's hard to believe by the sheer number of sources in opposition to that truth. Even years later, in 2001, the #1 newspaper, Chinese Daily, released an article titled Tiananmen Square, a Massacre, a Myth. In the article, it blames the myth on Western observers and a certain lurid BBC reporter. Another source claims that a 77-year-old doctor named Zhang Yoyong, who had treated victims of the massacre, urged the government to reassess their stance on the event, who was abducted after writing a letter exposing the fact that the government had used fragmentation bullets, a method banned by Global Assembly. After his abduction, he was subject to study sessions before being allowed to return home. There are many accounts of this harassment, especially from survivors of the massacre. The same source claims that there are accounts of students who were marked as leaders at the protest who had fled the country after their arrest and were not allowed back, even to visit family. These are prime examples of China changing the narrative or simply getting rid of first-hand accounts altogether. This completely shows the corruption, censorship, and silencing of free voices in China that has delegitimized the government. In conclusion, the history of Tiananmen Square and the actions taken by the government has forever changed Chinese society and history through a consistent violation of rights, economic reforms, censorship, and the battle for the truth. This has forever changed China and delegitimized the government. The real question that should be asked, however, is was it worth it to consolidate power under one party, even if it delegitimized the government?